Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today we're going to be continuing our top 100 games of all time. We're breaking into the top 50 today. We're going to be going through 50 to 41. As usual, timestamps to everything down below, and before we get started on the list, reminder that I am doing a support drive for the channel across the course of this top 100. I'll have a link to that video down below, but you have a chance to go ahead and win a bunch of games, and you don't have to pay a thing to go ahead and do so, although you do get extra entries if you do help out the channel. But with that, let's go ahead and have a conversation. I don't know why it's a conversation. It's not a conversation. Let's go ahead and talk about my top 50 games of all time. My top 50 through 41 games of all time, to be more specific. Starting off with number 50, which is one that I'm conflicted on, but it's too good of a game not to be here, and that's currently going to be Marvel Champions. This over here is a One Sharp Joe organizer. If I remember, I'll try to link to his site down below, but you can just go ahead and Google One Sharp Joe Crafts. He has a website, he has an Etsy store. He's been done a bunch of sponsorship stuff on the channel. This over here is not sponsored, but basically he does fantastic inserts, and this over here is going to be your Marvel Champions insert with like all the various cards and things and stuff. It's a little zoomed in over here, but basically this is what we got as far as all our stuff. This is one of 2 crates I have, and honestly, I have more because I still need to assemble some crates. But anyways, Marvel Champions. Marvel Champions is an LCG, a living card game, or limited card game. I never really get it down. From Fantasy Flight. It's one of several that they've put out over the years. From Warhammer. Yes, they did Warhammer. They did Star Wars. They've done a bunch of things. They did Android Netrunner. I believe the ones currently available are Lord of the Rings. We have Arkham Horror, and then we have Marvel Champions, and for me, my personal favorite from those is Marvel Champions. I love the gameplay of this. I love taking a superhero that I'm familiar with, starting with their 15 deck cards, and then 15 card deck, and then putting in the extra cards you need from the various, attributes that you're going to be utilizing for that hero, and then building out a deck, and then taking on whatever champion you need, whatever hero you need, whatever villain you need to take on. Alternatively, you can also go through a campaign, you can play it multiplayer, you can play it solo, but it's basically an overall very, very good time. The conflicted part of me is that as much as I enjoy the system, I find that they put out content faster than I can go through it. There are many games I love, and sometimes I play games I love on a regular, consistent basis. There are games I love that I'll play that game, 40, 50 times a year. Some of the games on this top 100 are games that I have played 50 plus times this year alone. Others are games I pull out, every 4.5 months and I get a play in, and Marvel Champions to me falls into that category. The problem is they come out with new content every single month, which means I love the game, so I want everything, but I don't play the game enough, so how can I justify getting everything? And mentally, I'm always in a space where if I'm not getting it all, then do I really love the game enough to even keep it? None of that is actually rational. It's just the thought process I go with. But Marvel Champions, the card play is delightful. The heroes, the familiarity is there. They give you the ability to play it as a one-shot or as a campaign. They have lots of difficulty aspects as far as modulating difficulty and or just having more or less difficult scenarios, whether you want to play a bit more casually or whether you really want to take the time to deck build against the person you are fighting off against. That's Marvel Champions. A delightful experience. It's still a game in my collection because I can't get rid of it. But I will admit, the whole entire process of not keeping up with it does have me tempted sometimes to just say, you know what, as good of a game as it is, maybe I just don't have room for that lifestyle game in my collection. But not today. Today, it's still in my top 50 games of all time. My number 49 is another excellent game. Another game that I only play once every 4 or 5 months, but it's also a game that I could play once every 4 or 5 months because they don't put out content all the time. Although they have had 3 Kickstarters for the exact same game, basically making the game, rehashing the game, and rehashing the game, and that is going to be Machina Arcana. Machina Arcana is a lovely experience. This is a dungeon crawling game, although the creator does not like referring to it as a dungeon crawling game, but this is a dungeon crawling game in which you are basically playing with Cthulhu-esque vibes. You're taking your little standee, wandering through the dungeon. It's all stand B based, it's not miniature based, but you wander through this dungeon as you start exploring this little 2x2 tile system. And I say 2x2, but like there's a lot of grids on that actual 2x2. It's a larger space, but as you move on to another space, it has a rolling effect, so areas of the dungeon can drop off, and villains can walk away effectively when that happens, which is important because, frankly, they're hard. They're hard to actually fight against the baddies. You're going to be dealing with traps, lighting, flipping a little switch and having grates pop on fire to take down the enemies. You're going to be moving away and running away from the enemies as often as you are engaging. You're going to be finding workbenches so you can go ahead and find additional gear and craft, various extras to your armor because it's a steampunk Lovecraftian universe that's going on over here. And there's tons of cool abilities. You can walk through walls if you get the right tool. You can jump over gaps that would otherwise have you dropping down in a pit of despair. There's a ton of things going on, from the steampunk gadgets, from the tight combat, from the fact that you really have to be on your toes as far as when you can actually tackle an enemy and survive, versus when you're setting yourself up for a terrible, terrible mistake in the experience. It is hard, it is challenging, it can run a little long. A single session, if you want to play a full session, it can run a little long, which is one of the things to be mindful of. It's not a campaign game, but it can be a longer experience as you go through tile after tile after tile, go through the chapter, accelerating the horror, the threat, all those various things. Machina Arcana is a delightful experience, not always the easiest one to table, but it's my number 49 game of all time. My number 47 is my number 48, because I skip numbers sometimes, is going to be Through the Ages from CGE. This is going to be from Vlaada Chvátil, Through the Ages, a new story civilization. They've already had Through the Ages, an old story civilization, quite some time ago. One of the first games I got when I got into gaming. Not first, but like first 50 or so. I remember trying to do a ton of research on Through the Ages versus Sid Meier's Civilization, because I played Sid Meier's Civilization. I loved that experience, and so when I knew there was a board game, a decently rated board game too, I was like, I want this game. But the forums were always like, hey, Through the Ages is a better version of that Sid Meier's experience. You should get that. And so I kept going back and forth between the actual IP versus the thing that everyone said did the IP better. I never actually played Sid Meier's Civilization. I did, years later, play New Dawn, which is a different conversation. Different games, similarities, not the same. Never actually ended up playing Sid Meier's itself, but I have played Through the Ages a lot, both on the app, both on the, I don't know if I played it on the computer. I never played the app. I've played this physical game over here. I've played it online on TTS or wherever. Not TTS. There was a site once that had it. I don't remember the site. Was it? I'm trying to remember which site I played it on. I don't remember offhand, but I played it online, I played it on the app, and I played it in person. This is an excellent experience that, again, can be a little hard to table and to know all the rules, but if you do know all the rules, which, honestly, if you play it online enough and if you actually track what's going on, it's not the hardest to track the entire sequence of how it plays out, but it is a game that gives you various tutorials to kind of get yourself up and running to, they're weaker experiences, they don't give you the full experience, but they can help you get started. But this is basically a Civ game that's abstracted as action economy and cards. The entire thing is cards. You're just getting cards. You have cards that represent your new military technologies. You have cards that represent your politics, your endeavors, your islands that you're trying to conquest. You have cards that represent the new technologies, the better mining tools, the better civilizations or buildings, all these things you have. If you ever played Sid Meier's Civilization, if you ever played the old school ones, forget 5, go back to 2, to 3, and you remember that process where you're like upgrading your throne room, you like upgrade this building and that, and you're building the throne room slowly upgrading. You have that sense when you upgrade your tableau in this game and you get a better temple, a better sports stadium, and you slowly but surely get better things that upgrade your perks, and as you go through every single turn, generating the technology, generating the culture, generating the things you need to win, while also engaging in occasional military conquest or border skirmishes, while also trying to be mindful of the various colonies you have to inhabit. This is a resource optimization game, a resource management game with a ton of cards, an action economy, and just a ton of good things that make Through the Ages, A Story of Civilization, my number 48 game of all time. My number 47 is not on this table, so excuse me while I come right back. I don't know how that happened, but I neglected to grab The Crew as my number 47 game of all time. The Crew Mission Deep Sea over here, and I think The Crew and The Crew Mission Deep Sea are both great games. I think Mission Deep Sea is just slightly better because it does everything that The Crew does, but the goals are a bit more variable. But the general idea of this game is this is going to be a cooperative trick-taking game. You're going to have these cards over here, you're going to be divvying up the various cards, different colors to the players, but you have certain goals you have. And the goals could be anything. The goals could be, make sure to win with a 3, win a trick with a 3, or be the first person to win a trick. Don't win any single tricks in a round. Make sure that you win the green 7. There's all these different things you're trying to go through, and you deal out the cards, and then players take turns choosing the tasks, because the tasks, they look at their hand, they know the cards in play, and they're like, yeah, I think I can win the green 7 because I have a green 8, so I can probably win the green 7. What happens if you don't think you can do that? What happens if none of the cards on the table look viable to you? Well, you'll just have to do your best and figure out the way to do it, because, sure, winning a green 7 with an 8 is easier, but you can still win the green 7 if you don't have an 8 or a 9 in green. You can try to play through the sequence and try to make sure that you end up playing a card, that you play into yellow, and they no longer have green. You could still win it. There's lots of things you're trying to do here, but ultimately, if you like the concept of trick-taking, but it's never really worked for you, The Crew might be a good place for you to find out if it works for you. For me, this is the game that turned me from someone who didn't like trick-taking to someone who loves looking for new trick-taking experiences. The process of trying to work together and understanding the hand management of trick-taking through a cooperative experience really kind of turned the turned the corner for me on trick taking, where previously it always just felt like, okay, great, you have a hand of cards and you just play the cards that make sense. I didn't really get the puzzle of it. With the crew, it helped me see the patterns. It helped me see what you're trying to do and how you're trying to manage a hand, knowing the possible options at the table, but not necessarily knowing everyone's individual cards, and then playing through based on that. There's a lot of hand management and trick taking, and the crew is the game that helped me start to see and appreciate that genre, that mechanic. I think it's a fantastic experience. It has continuously held up for me. Again, I do think Mission Deep Sea is just better than, I want to say, Quest for Planet 9? Is that what the original one's called? I don't even remember right now. It's honestly still in the box. I have both just stored in the same box over here. But that's going to be the crew Mission Deep Sea, my number 47 game of all time. My number 46, I'm trying to remember how I messed up this order over here. My number 46 is going to be a very heavy box, and that's going to be Concordia. Concordia is a heavy box to have like all these heavy resources in it. I think I can safely flip this one over here. Some games I can safely flip, some not. But Concordia is basically a, I don't even know how to describe this. You're going to be running around the board over here trying to get as many points as possible from a variety of things, but a big section of your points are going to be these cards you're drafting up here. These cards are going to be your actions in the game, but they're also going to be how you score. So they're going to give you points for different things you've done well across the course of the game, but they are your actions. This is a hand management game. It's a game where you have a basic hand of cards, and as you play actions, eventually you can play a card to take back your actions, but that means you have to be pacing yourself, because whenever you play an action, you won't see that until you either give up an entire turn to get it back, or eventually you figure out that cycle, because eventually you will have to give up an entire turn to get all your cards back. And so there's a large degree of pacing, there's a large degree of choosing which new cards to buy, because they'll give you more agency, but they'll also give you more point scoring. Meanwhile, you're moving your various people and your ships around the board to establish new locations, to gather more resources, to slowly but surely build up a stronger and stronger board presence as you work with a degree of a manufacturing little puzzle going on as far as your resource economy of the game, but a lot of it comes down to the hand management, knowing how and where to trade in goods, knowing where to chase those points. Concordia is an excellent game that has continued to hold up for me. It's from Matt Gertz. I believe it's my highest rated Matt Gertz game in my collection. I have 2 or 3 left over here. I've enjoyed Matt Gertz's stuff in general. I think Navigato is excellent. I think Antique is excellent. Antique Duellum is excellent. He has a lot of great game designs. The 2 or 3 are left in my collection, and Concordia is the highest rated of that at my number 46 game of all time. My number 45 is going to be one that once upon a time was even top 20, I want to say. I don't remember exactly how high this one was, but that's going to be Food Chain Magnate, which is an incredible experience. An incredible experience. It's also very, very brain burner, which is why year over year, this stays in my top 100, at least for now, but it is one that has continuously dropped down every single year. It started off really high, maybe 17, I don't remember, it's going back. The first year I played it, I want to say this might have been my number 17 game of all time, but it might have been a different number, I'm just vaguely going by recollection. But then it slowly dropped. And it slowly dropped because as good as an experience that Food Chain Magnate is, I find that this to me is like a once or twice a year game. I just don't have the mental stamina to be able to be like, at the end of a long day, I rarely am sitting there being like, yes, let me just engage in economic warfare with my opponents while I try to think through the way every single thing will cascade and unfold. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's incredible. I think it's a great game. I'm just not always up for it. And so it has slowly dropped for me over time, but it's still coming in at my number 45 game of all time, which is still, again, a impressive feat over here. But Food Chain Magnate from the Splatter Games, they have a bunch of games, and again, I think their games in general are fantastic. I think Indonesia's fantastic. I think Bus is fantastic. I think, what else have I played from them? Antiquity is fantastic. I still have Roads and Boats. Haven't played Roads and Boats. I probably should play Roads and Boats. For some reason, I have no real interest in Horseless Carriage. I think I kind of saw that one land, and people kind of talked about it for like 2 weeks, and haven't seen a lot of buzz about it since then, so I don't know if Horseless Carriage is one that I care about or not. Time will tell on that. But Food Chain Magnate is my favorite game from their games. Most of their games I've kind of like let them go over the years because, again, as good as they are, I find I don't often play them, and when I do have that kind of mental interest, I'm going to play Food Chain Magnate. But I spend a lot of time talking around the game and not the actual game itself. Food Chain Magnate is economic warfare. That's the way I describe this game. In the game, you're basically trying to manage a restaurant chain. So you go ahead, you're selling burgers. Of course you're selling burgers. Who doesn't sell burgers? And so you go ahead and you throw up some advertisements in the neighborhood for people to want burgers. Because if you can increase the interest in burgers, well, great, you'll sell more burgers. Except the problem is, Joe at the table with you, he's a bit of a jerk. He sees you advertising for burgers, so he starts making burgers, but he's making more burgers and he's slashing his prices. So now he's selling burgers at a lower price than you're paying for the advertising. advertising of it. So what do? Well, you get into the pizza game. Of course you get into the pizza game. Why wouldn't you get into the pizza game? The problem is, Jane over there at the table is also a jerk, and she starts getting into the pizza game. So you start advertising drinks, because at this point, you don't really care if they want burgers or pizza, but you start advertising heavily for drinks, and you start upgrading as much as possible, and you start getting the demand for drinks to be so high that even as the other players start to sell drinks themselves and start to lower their prices, you just continuously increase your advertising and increase the demand and start building up the neighborhood, and then you start cutting in and you go ahead and add a luxury manager, and suddenly you double the price of your drinks. But meanwhile, the problem is they're still making drinks, but it doesn't matter because they want 50 drinks. The neighborhood wants 50 drinks every single round, and your neighbors are only going ahead and producing 10 and 10 drinks respectively. You go ahead and produce the other 3. You double the price. People still want the drinks. What are they going to do? You're the only place in town where they can go ahead and fulfill the demand, and so people are buying your drinks above everything else, and no one cares about burgers or pizzas any single more at all. I was doing great until I said any single more. That's not a sentence, that's not a phrase, that's not a thing. But that's basically how you play Food Chain Magnate. That's the idea. You're constantly undercutting what your opponents do. You're constantly trying to buy the right cards, the right roles to be able to manage. I forgot the part. I should have also said, I don't know, let's put up another name. I should have said Tom in the corner, meanwhile. He just has a restaurant chain with 700 waitresses and a few bonuses, and he seems to be doing well too. That would have been another good throw in there. But that's the idea of the game. You're constantly trying to adapt your business to what's happening. You are constantly trying to undercut your opponents to be 2 turns ahead of them, because you have to be 2 turns ahead. Everyone else is 1 turn ahead, so if you're only 1 turn ahead, you are just playing the same game as every other player. You have to be thinking through not just what you're doing, but how they're going to react to what you're doing, and what your backup plan is for how they react to what you're doing in order to win this game. There's a reason it's mentally draining. But it is my number 45 game of all time. My number 44 is, well, I mean, it's also a mental mind game, but it's significantly smaller in what it's trying to do, both box size and everything about it. That's going to be Hanamikoji, Geisha's Road. I love this game. This, by the way, this is like the big box slipcover all-in version with Geisha's Road and Hanamikoji. Actually, did I say Hanamikoji, Geisha's Road? I meant to say Hanamikoji and Geisha's Road. I lump these as a set together, but it's basically 2 versions of the same game, the same core concept. This is the best I cut, you choose game I have ever played. The general idea of Hanamikoji is that you're going to sit there and you're going to line up a bunch of cards. The base game, Geisha's Road, is a little different. The base game of Hanamikoji is you line up a bunch of cards, and your goal is to win 4 of those cards. It's a little more complicated than that, but let's keep it simple for now. So you have to win 4 of the 7 cards. And you do so by placing cards to your side, but here's the catch. You have a hand of cards, and every turn you're drawing cards, so that ultimately across the course of the game, you're going to see all the cards except for one. One card will not be in play. But the way you take an action on your turn is you don't actually just get to play a card to help you. That would be way too simple. What's the fun of that? What you want to do in this game is you're going to sit there and say, I'm taking the action in which I will play 3 cards, but you pick one of them. So I get to play cards in my hand. I get to create the choice, but you actually are the one who chooses. Or I get to create 2 piles, and you pick one of those piles. And so half the game is all about giving your opponent access to the cards in your hand, but doing so in a way that is the most opportunistic for you, where the choices they have might seem like they go a certain way, but they don't know what you have in your hand. You're trying to frame a choice and a decision that ultimately they're making that choice and decision, but they're doing so with less information than you, which gives you the leg up even though they're choosing. It is a mental mind game. It is a fascinating puzzle. Geisha's Road is a similar concept, just instead of a card row, you're going round and round in a circle, slightly different scoring opportunities, but the same general idea as far as how you're doing an I cut, you choose mechanic. This box comes with all the various extras, which also means it's a dozen different ways to go ahead and mix up the tokens you're playing with, so they're slightly different, giving you more variability, but I don't even think you need it, honestly. If I was just recommending you get this game, I would say go find Hanamikoji, Geisha's Road. It's a $15, $20 game. You don't need the big box. You don't need all the expansions. You don't need all of that. You just need the opportunity to be able to go ahead and present your friend with a terrible, terrible choice that seems like there's only one option, but ultimately, you know better than them how it's going to play out. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's Hanamikoji, Geisha's Road. My number 43 is going to be Board Game Geek's #1 game of all time, and that is Brass Birmingham. It's not my #1 game of all time. I think Brass Birmingham is fantastic, make no mistake, but it's not my #1 personally. And this part of it is that mental aspect as well. This is another mentally draining game. This is coming to you from Martin Wallace from Rocksteady Games, and this is going to have you, is this upside down or is it upside down? This is going to have you managing, I guess, Birmingham. I guess that's probably the location you're dealing with, but you're basically building up an economy as well. This is another resource management, location management, card management game. Martin Wallace does some amazing card management experiences, and Brass Birmingham is just one of them. And there's Lancashire, there's Birmingham. I think both are fantastic. Lancashire is the one I fell in love with. That's actually not true. Age of Industry is the one I fell in love with. From there I found Lancashire, which felt very similar to Age of Industry, and there I felt Birmingham after that, and Birmingham kind of felt like it did clean up one or two things that Lancashire did. I do miss the ships in Lancashire, but I just don't need both of these in my collection. But Brass Birmingham has you managing your cards in your hand. There's two phases to the game. There's the canal era, there's the rail era, but you're setting yourself up to try to build out various industries. But everything you do has a trade-off. You're trying to go ahead and build the coal, because you need coal to get things. You need coal, you need iron, so maybe you build the coal and the iron, but then everyone else is going to be buying it from you. So you're creating a market, you're creating a demand, you're creating opportunity. But if you just focus on that, what they get out of your coal and your iron is going to be more than what you're putting into it. So sure, people are buying coal from you, but does it matter if they're the ones who are creating the better, more powerful industries out of it? And so there's always a little trade-off in the game as to what is it you're building, what is it you're providing to the other players, how are you helping this thriving little city, Birmingham, grow as an industry. There's a lot of things to go through, but you have to be thinking through constantly how you're managing your resources, how you're getting your actions done. Do you have the right network set up, the right cards for that network, and are you taking the most advantage out of the way you're going to build your buildings, the way you're going to skip past certain buildings to be able to go ahead and continue to build out your industry, and how are you going to pivot and adjust when the game leaves the canal era, enters the rail era, and you have to rethink all those same connection points again with some framework in place, but not quite the same framework you had before. There's a ton to consider in the game, including, I didn't even get to the part where you take loans. You have to take loans in the game, and you have to wonder when is the right time to take the loan. You constantly need money, but the earlier you take the loan, the more interest you're paying on it, and is what you're doing with that money worth it that you want to take it right now, or do you hold off? Do you maybe go ahead and take an action where you can sell multiple things at once and economize on that? Because actions are just as precious and limited as money in the game, and you're constantly trying to optimize around both. Brass Birmingham is a delightful experience that gives you immediate decisions and a lot to consider, and there's a reason it's the #1 game of all time. My number 2 is a child. Yes, buddy? I'll be up in a minute. My number 2. 2 cuts in one video. I don't know what's happening today. But with that, my number 42. Give me a second. My number 42 is Crokinole. Not the most convenient. I mean, let's be happy it's not 49, because then I have to figure out what to do with the rest of this video. Anyways, 42 is going to be Crokinole. This board over here is from Tracy Boards, who in my opinion makes the best boards in the, well, I shouldn't say best. From the ones I've tried, they seem to be the best boards. But Crokinole is a delightful game. Now granted, last year, I think this was number 7 of all time or something like that. It was very high last year. But I also played a ton of Crokinole last year. And as I said at the very beginning of this whole video series, I do have recency bias. The more I play different things, the more they move or shift around. I think Crokinole is fantastic. I am rarely going to turn down a game of Crokinole, specifically 4 players. That is my preferred way of playing this. But just the flicking of discs back and forth on this board, as you try to go ahead and land that perfect shot, combined with the beautifulness of this table presence, combined with the sleekness of just how fast a good board that's all polished and smooth and ready to go, and your ability to land that shot, to ricochet that shot, to hit your opponents, to work with your teammate as you try to set up the perfect win. This is almost more of a sport than it is a board game, but hey, if Board Game Geek is going to have it on their top 100 games of all time, I think it's in the top 100. If Board Game Geek is going to have it as a board game, regardless of where it is, then I can definitely put this as a top 100 board game of all time for me. That's going to be Crokinole, my number 42. A drop from last year, but still somewhat notable. Anyways, now that I got rid of that, we're going to go ahead to my number 41 of this list. The last game on this list before we go ahead, and we'll see you again in the next video. And my number 41 is another game by Martin Wallace. A game that I'd argue that most people would consider to be not as good as Brass, while still being very good. But for me, it is my preferred one, and that is going to be Anno 1800. And the reason I prefer Anno 1800 is it gives me the same feelings and vibes as Brass, but in a shorter playtime and with less mental headspace devoted to it. You may have noticed across this particular video that less mental headspace is something I prefer in games. I like a good midweight Euro. I like a good heavy Euro, but it's always situational about the time and the place for anything, for everything. I find that when you hit a certain range, and I think Lacerda and Splotter games do fall into that range, but Brass is bordering on that range as well, there's a certain point where it starts to feel so overwhelming in the amount of thought process to optimize around things that sometimes I'm like, you know what, I've had a long day, I've played 17 games, I've gotten a whole bunch of emails done, I've finished that report, I've filmed those 3 videos, and I just want something that gives me the feeling of Brass Birmingham, but with a drop more accessibility. And Anno 1800 does that. Fun fact, I downloaded this game for the first time. There's a Steam winter sale going on, so I downloaded the actual video game and I started it. I don't have any strong opinions yet because so far I've clicked around and done nothing interesting, but hey, it does seem to be well rated as an actual video game. But in Anno 1800, what you're doing is managing supply lines. The general idea is you're going to have your own little board over here, and you're managing your own personal board as far as the various depots of how you're going to get resources going. And so you're creating those resources, you're creating those trees, those tech trees effectively, but you also have to rely on the other players. You see, the other players are also creating their own sort of things. You know, you go ahead and make gunpowder, I'll make glass, you make brass, I'll make some silk, we'll figure it all out, and we'll just trade and barter with each other. You don't want to be shy about bartering from other players because sure, they benefit, they get some money, but you get the benefit of skipping whatever steps they have to jump through to go ahead and get things done. And so there's a constant trade-off of being in the right place at the right time. Similar to Brass Birmingham, again, same designer, same general systems, it might seem tempting to always have your own access to your own things. I'm not going to buy your coal, I want my own coal. But that might be that's a short-sighted viewpoint because ultimately taking advantage of the infrastructure, taking advantage of the network will help you in the long run, even as it also helps your opponent. In the game, you're trying to get as many points as possible. You're trying to clear your hand, though. The whole goal, the whole end point is to clear your hand of cards, but along the way, there's dozens of things that will give you points, including those cards that you're clearing will often give you points as you play them. There's ways to discard them as well, whole different ballpark. But I find Anno 1800 gives me the same vibes that Brass does, but with a little less mental headspace, a little less juggling, and a lot more of just, hey, I'm going to build a bunch of stuff, you'll use those things, I'll use your things, and we'll all work our way towards as many victory points as possible in an hour-and-a-half long gameplay. I think Anno 1800 is fantastic. This is my number 41 game of all time, and the last game on this particular video. We'll be back with more videos in the top 100. We have 4 videos more to go. The top 40 comes up, which is the best games are showing up at this point. Honestly, people regularly ask me, can I get a list of your 5 out of 5 games? And my 5 out of 5 games are about 50, I have to double check, but I think 55-ish down to 0. No, 54 maybe. 54. The top 54 games of my top 100 games of all time are all my 5 out of 5. So if you want to see my 5 out of 5s, we're already in them. All of these were 5 out of 5s to me. These are all the 5 out of 5s, and the next 4 videos are all my 5 out of 5. So if you're looking for the games I like the most, these are them. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.